Nobody tells you growing up that when you want to start your own business, that you are going to absolutely work 24/7. And if there was more than 24 hours in a day, you would do that too. Now, adding raising children on top of it, it's a complete disaster. It's exhausting. I'm constantly operating at like 50%. I don't know how anything gets done. It's a miracle that they have the right shoes on their feet. I've definitely shown up to work in my house slippers before. There's no right way to do it. It's a mess, but I love every second of it.
One of the most challenging things about running an e-commerce business at scale, when you're doing thousands of transactions a day across multiple different sales channels, is the operational complexity that scales with it. You have to do refunds on eBay and you have to do customer service tickets on Amazon, and everything just kind of gets out of hand. You get reports from Shopify and Amazon, and all of them have weird, unique parameters that don't match the way you look at things, and you're manipulating data. And you just want one source of truth that has gross revenue, discounts, COGS, margin. You just want one thing that has all of it. And that's where Fulfill comes out of the box with the best reporting in the business. It provides accurate, reliable data systems. It does order management for you. And it does all that without needing, customization. They've worked with e-commerce businesses like mine at Ridge, like Hexclad, and they've built the most accurate, up-to-date reporting that comes right out of the box. It has real-time insights. You can make better decisions. And you know when you sell something, what you sold it for, what the COGS were. And if you have to do returns or refunds, you know all of that in one spot, in one out-of-the-box report. So thank you so much, Phil, for being the flagship sponsor of this pod. If you order something from me, it will be sent through Fulfill's data pipelines to my 3PL. If you do it from Amazon, that comes into Fulfill reporting as well. So thank you, Fulfill. You're the best.
All right, welcome to the Operators Pod, episode 80. We're coming in hot today on a topic that I'm sure you've all been burning to listen to, which is parenting, relationships, being an entrepreneur, raising kids, all that stuff, right? If none of that stuff applies to you and you're just a single dude in a basement building a brand, you can cancel right now. If you have a spouse, a partner, children, this is a conversation between Mike and Katie and myself. We all have kids. We're all married. And it was actually a really great conversation. So I hope you enjoy the show. We're going to cover a whole manner of topics. Let's get into it. There's nothing more humbling than having a kid.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When I remember going to market back in the days and I'd have my newborn strapped to me and they would like spit up down my shirt, right? And so all day I was paranoid that and probably not paranoid, I actually did smell like vomit most of the day. I have tried to breastfeed in public. I have taken my kids back and forth. One time it was the ABC Kids Expo, and I flew to Vegas. And on my way there, my mom was watching my son. He was 2 years old at the time. And when I land right on the airplane, my phone just blows up, which is like every parent's like greatest fear. And so I call my mother. They were in the hospital because my son had fallen and hit in his face on the coffee table and it had like blown up his whole face. And they were admitting him because they were worried. And I completely panicked, had to go back, in full tears, beg for a flight home. I ended up sitting next to, he was some kind of a preacher or something. He prayed the whole way home. It was one of those really awesome moments where it was like he was in the right place at the right time, But I still like stress, sweat, and ran to the hospital, spent the next 5 days in the hospital with my 2-year-old. So when I look back, I mean, everything has been chaos in the last 20 years, but in a good way.
Having kids is tough.
Yeah.
It's actually, yeah. It's, as an entrepreneur, I'm like, I feel like I have a high tolerance for pain and stress. And then, you throw kids into your life and you're like, I didn't know anything.
I know. And you're like a day of winning when your kids are little is, if you didn't get any kind of bodily fluid on you.
Oh, dude. Yeah. There was like, this is gross, but this is like when she's like not even a year old. So like, she's still really small, maybe 6, 7 months old, 8 months old. And we were just having an awful day and I ordered pizza. Right. So my wife and I sit down, my mother is there at this point. We're all sitting down, like in our living room, just eating pizza, exhausted. and my wife is holding our daughter, eating her pizza, and my daughter decides to in her diaper, and it like squirts out on the pizza, and my
Oh,
mom
on the
is like
pizza.
so disgusted, and my wife and I at this point are so tired. All we could do is both die
Die laughing.
laughing.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the funniest thing ever.
Yeah.
I'm like she even ruined our food that day.
Yeah, I know. Constantly, you're just like, am I being pranked? Like, where are the cameras? Where?
Yeah, that was it. That
Yeah.
was it. It was like, oh my God.
That's
Like
the
this
thought
is
that's crossed my mind the most is why is there not a reality show like following us? Because I'm pretty sure I could beat the Kardashians with the amount of drama
that's
that
probably
my
why there is a
family and
Kardashian
work life
show.
has. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just start by like saying the whole genesis of the idea for this episode was that balancing having a family, personal life with leading a company is really challenging. It's challenging for everybody who has any job. It's especially challenging when you're trying to lead a company or an organization that has a lot of people in it. And so we thought it'd be great to do an episode today where we talked about trying to balance all of those things and what does it look like to try and actually be intentional and excellent in these very different areas of your life. And so we invited Katie because this has been a big part of your life, Katie, and your story building Caden Lane. And so yeah, that's the whole idea for the episode. So I guess like just to kind of frame it, let reintroduce yourself for anybody who wasn't listening at the very beginning of Operators when we had you on the first time. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe we can jump into the topic.
Yeah, I love it. And absolutely, this is my favorite topic. Not only, right, do I have a baby business, Caden Lane, but I am a mom to 5 kids.
Wow.
3 I birthed and 2 are bonus children. But so, I live in constant chaos. And it's a passion of mine too to talk about work life, balance or the lack thereof. Because I think it's just all fake. Everyone's just being fake and nobody has figured it out.
Katie, what are the ages of the kids?
Oh my God. So, okay, I've got 3 of them in college. I'll start with the youngest. Lila is 12. And then I have a 16-year-old, a 19-year-old, 2 19-year-olds, and a 22-year-old. And I might have gotten some of those wrong. Literally.
No kidding.
We just took 2 of mine went off to college this year. So we literally have 3 in college and 2 at home. And I will say
Wow.
it's amazing. And this is why usually I preach to people you should only have 2 kids because it is so much more manageable than having 3 or 5 or 10.
You mentioned bonus. What does bonus mean?
Bonus is second marriage. So
Okay.
3 of them I birthed. And then I was a single mom for a very long time while I grew Caden Lane. And then just almost 2 years ago, I married again. It took a lot of convincing, but I did it.
Mhm.
And I got 2 extra bonus children with that, and I love them dearly.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
So when you started Caden Lane, you had kids already.
I did.
How
Well,
old were they?
no, I was pregnant. So
Oh, wow.
my whole adventure started off
Perfect
literally.
timing, right?
Yeah, perfect timing. Yeah, it turns out there's nothing better than a pregnant person selling diaper bags and crib bedding. It was really great marketing. But yeah, I started, 20 years ago. This month was our 20-year anniversary, and I had just found out I was pregnant, and placed my first purchase order with my first factory and went door to door to brick and mortar stores with a big old baby bump. And then took my 5-week-old to market with me in New York. And that's where we first signed up with Nordstrom. So the rest is kind of history. It's been chaos, and I don't think I've done either perfectly. For sure, not the mothering part, but I'd like to say that I haven't raised assholes, and that's been my goal from day one. So, and I've got a company that I love, and it's filled with working women, working moms specifically. And so, yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this topic. It is something that I'm very passionate about.
Well, one of the reasons why I love the fact that we're talking about this is because I think sometimes we can kind of lose the plot, when we get so focused on growing our businesses or trying to quote unquote be successful that we can lose sight of the fact that there are other areas of your life where if they don't go well, it's not going to matter much how much money you have. It's not going to matter how much, how big your company gets because you're not going to be very happy. There's this multi-generational Harvard happiness study that gets referenced quite a bit. And consistently the theme is relationships, especially relationships with family, are one of the 2 or 3 biggest drivers of happiness. And it doesn't really matter how successful you are. If you don't have relational happiness, you're just not going to be a very happy person. You're going to live a shorter life. You're going to live a less healthy life. So it's great to be talking about this. And we have a similar story to you, Katie, that as my daughter, I think my son was 3 or 4 and my daughter was 1 when we started Simple Modern. And I always tell people, like, you would never draw it up that way. But the opportunities come when they come. Matt, what about you? How old were your kids did you have kids when you first started with Pila?
No. Well, so I only have one. I'm like the half parent on this call.
Oh my God, he shouldn't even be on this call. That
I know,
doesn't
right?
Yeah,
count.
who let you in?
Yeah.
Who
let
I can
you
run a zone
in?
defense or a tag team, on this kid. I have one daughter. She's 9. No, we had all of when actually it was pre-Pila. So was just coming to the end of my first company. So I think she was 3 when I sold it. But I will say, like, having her was definitely, I think, was like the beginning of the end for that business, because I had like started to invest in Pila, had my first company, and my wife, like, we had our daughter. My wife lost her father 2 months later. So like that next year to 2 was just hell. And I think that was like I remember my wife saying, like, dude, you're not Elon Musk. You cannot run 2 companies. So like you need to get rid of one of them. And like, just,
Was your wife working too, Matt? Or
no, at that time, no. So we retired. So her and I started our first company together. And then we kind of retired her about a year before she got pregnant. And that was more of a, like, this is just good for our marriage. We should not work together anymore. Because like, like we worked together really well, but it's sort of like the actual marriage just turned into us talking about work all the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It can easily be a maid married to a butler in marriage if you're not careful, where it's like it's all operational, like what needs to get done, what needs to get cleaned, who needs to get where,
Yeah.
and kind of the fighting against that. This is actually one of the things that I think I've learned about myself this year, and maybe you guys can relate with this. So being a CEO is basically training your brain to be decisive, to take in lots of information, to very quickly make decisions, pattern identify, things like that. The problem is none of that stuff maps to being in relationships very well at all. Like
No.
if your wife comes to you and is like wanting to tell you about her day, and you're like, yeah, just give me all the information so I can tell you what you should do. Like that's not going to go well. And it's same with your kids. Like, like it's been said with kids that quantity time is quality time. And so it's been fascinating to me to see how, like, I'm developing these kind of mental skills at work that not only are unhelpful at home, but are like aren't assets, but they're actually like they can be like liabilities, because if I'm not careful, it can make me be exactly what you're talking about, Matt. It can transform the relationship. So it's more like, hey, what do we need to do? What do we need to get done? And that's not really, that's not really where it's at. Is that what you guys were starting to experience?
Yeah. I mean, for us, for sure. Um, Look, I think, like, Jen and I, we default to working well together in our relationship. Like, we're good partners, right? We've never had like extreme conflict. It's not like we don't fight, but we don't have like those big blow ups that some of our friends might. So we're just like, we default so well to just like, we work well together. So as parents, and this is sort of the interesting thing that we've discovered is like, having Jen at home now. So Olive's 9. Jen's been at home that whole time, right? So she's not gone and built anything else. She wants to build something again someday, but right now she's like, I'm just focused on family and kid. Because we actually have like this history of working well together, I find we sort of like do this divide and conquer thing really well, right? Which can create its own conflict, because like sometimes, again, CEO brain, I'm like, I look at my wife, I'm like, yeah, but you're accountable for that. Like that's your fucking job. This is my job.
Man,
and when
I'm
you're a
biting
parent,
my
it's
tongue.
like
I'm biting my tongue real hard right now,
I know.
guys, because I feel
it's-
like my brain's immediately going back to your whole executive, like EA conversation. I'm like, so Matt, you basically have somebody at home managing your entire life for you, and it's so hard for you to run an entire.
No, it's not hard at all. Whoa, no,
Yeah.
no. Nothing about my
about-
life is hard.
Wait
Let
a
me get
second.
that out of the way right away.
What about the people that are listening? And I want to go back to what you said, Mike, about the relationship comment. and how you're not really happy unless you're in a relationship. And I'm going to tell you that honestly, the happiest years of my life was when I wasn't in a relationship.
No kidding.
Okay, well, let me clarify.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily mean a romantic relationship. I just mean if your life
Support.
doesn't have meaningful relationships. And like, I would
Yes.
guess that even during the years that you were single, you had really meaningful relationships with your children, with
Children
your
and my
coworkers.
job. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and I think that was the point I was trying to make. I mean, often in our culture, there's a study out there that the average it was something like they were looking at friendships in 38 to 40-year-old men, and there was something like 25% of them outside of their spouse did not have a single person they would identify as a friend. And so, in one of the ways that our culture, there's been books written about this, like Bowling Alone, but it's like our culture has kind of gotten to the point where like for a lot of people, the only significant relationship in their life is their significant other.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why we're so unhealthy. Like you're saying, Katie, like I wasn't trying to say that, but it's so easy for people to hear that now that we're saying like, oh, meaningful relationships means spouse.
Or partner
But
or who, yeah, your
yeah,
support
and that it's
system.
romantic in nature, but we just need relational depth and actual friendship. I
Yeah.
think that might even be a deeper need than like romantic
Yeah.
connection. Is that we need like actual friendship in our lives, or we just really struggle, right?
Well, and I feel like too, like Matt, to your comment, I mean, I get asked a lot, how do you do it all? Right? Because I have to be the CEO and I have to be the mother. And I
Mhm.
feel like, I mean, are you guys asked that a lot? How do you
Oh
do it
yeah,
No.
all? No.
really?
No, I
No.
You
think
don't get
that's
asked that,
uniquely
Matt?
a female thing, Katie. I honestly
I
like,
I
I have
get I
other
get asked that
Yeah.
all the time by people,
Do
for
you
sure. They're
really?
like, "How do you balance all this stuff?" Because I think the reality is no matter how you're situated professionally, it feels taxing to both have a job and then to have a kind of a clan that you're responsible for, whether you're single parenting or you have a
Right.
marriage or you have a mixed family or whatever else. It's just hard, right?
Right.
And
Well,
this isn't just like we don't have like the market cornered on this because we're CEOs. Like I just think it's hard in general. So people are like, if it's hard for me working like a normal 9 to 5 job, it's got to be impossible if you're a CEO.
yeah.
So one quick thing, like I actually find I get asked about balance with business. I don't actually get asked a lot about like balance when it comes to home life,
Well, it's
parenting.
probably because maybe most people know that your wife, that's kind of her job, right? Is to
In
take
our
care
close
of,
circle of friends, for sure, right?
yeah.
Like she's the primary caretaker at home with our daughter. And yeah, so I think that like most people know that that's a thing. But even when I
Yeah.
find, and I don't know if this is just being a dude or because like
It's
my I have
definitely just being a dude.
it might be because I have a
This
few.
is why I love having
I
Katie
am
on
just
here, is
literally
that she's
biting my
This is
totally
why we
tongue.
love
bringing
Katie.
the other female perspective, which
Yeah.
is fantastic.
Because you know
Yeah, I've
what?
got a
You guys are
handful.
completely leaving out. Like, what about the people that are running a company and so is their partner, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I have
So,
friends like that, Katie. That's kind of what I have like several friends where both partners are entrepreneurs. They run companies, but it's the wife that gets asked all the time about balance.
yeah, you know
It's
why?
not
Because
really the
she's running
dude
her
that gets
company
asked.
and her life, and he's only worrying about his company
Right.
for the most part.
So let's dive into this with you, Katie, because
Okay.
I think you're right. I think in our society, we just like not just the United States. I think this is like a global thing. I think the amount of mental load on women is disproportionate to men. Like
Absolutely.
I don't know why that is.
Question.
I don't know if it's like we're lazy and it's kind of been okay to be late, for to say like, hey, because in most families it's like the woman handles all of the kids logistics. She's handling like all of like, hey, remembering about family and people's birthdays and keeping the company, the family schedule
Where your
and
car keys are, if your laundry's
exactly. Like
done, like,
there's 1,000 different things that that kind of get put on women. That they're usually the emotional kind of expectations are placed on. So like obviously you building a company, being a really successful entrepreneur while also having children and single parenting, which is like, okay, let's just take this, the difficulty slider all the way up to insanity. And you kind of hinted at this really interesting idea that work-life balance is a myth. So let's attack that head on. If work-life balance is a myth, like it's unachievable, then what was the strategy you used? And as you reflect on it, what would you have done the same? What would you have done differently?
yeah. So for me, I kind of look at it as I think that our life, right? On both ends, like your relationship, your family, professionally, it's very seasonal. And I'm not talking like winter, summer, spring. I think a season can be like a week to week or a month to month or a year. And when I look back as to, when I was starting the company and I was married back 20 years ago, right? But when we actually shifted and became a DTC brand only, I was already single and had a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And when I think about the things that are important in my life, and I think you guys would agree, it's, your professional career, your success, right? Your job. That's one. The second category is kind of like your health, right? Like, am I exercising? Am I taking care of myself? Am I getting a massage or whatever it is that maybe brings you, self-care? And then the third one is relationships. And that can be friends and family, or anybody, right, that's giving you the support. And when I look back over the last 20 years, and I think even as it stands today, you can only really focus on 2 of them at one time. Like, can you guys think of any time in your life where all 3 were priorities, right? And when I was younger, it was very easy for me to only focus on family because I had toddlers running around. It was insanity. And work or friends, right? Like, and those kind of flip-flop back and forth. I could say without a doubt right now, the one that's on the back burner is my health, because a glass of wine brings my anxiety level, lower very quickly. And I'm not doing near enough exercising. But I think because we have this pressure to like have all 3 of them, right? Like the ideal life you're supposed to have is, happy and healthy kids, a successful marriage, a partner that can help you get through things, a successful job. Is your job growing? What does your growth look like? And then, are you exercising, right? Like, that's, my mother loves to say that to me. She's like, you look tired. Are you exercising enough? And I'm like, I am freaking tired, mother. I've got 5 kids and,
That is never, by the way, when somebody tells you you look tired, you're like, I don't know what you're trying to achieve with
it's
that.
the
But
ultimate insult. Yes. It
it's
is a
like, yeah,
passive
it's like, there's
aggressive.
no way I'm going to take that well. Like, okay, so I look terrible. Like,
Yeah.
what are you trying to communicate here?
Same when she says, have you been exercising? Like, no, mom, that's why I'm fat right now. Thank you very much. Like, let's move on. But let me tell you what I have focused on. So anyways, I kind of, when I can look back and, a lot of people kind of through this process have asked, right? Like, how did you, it's been 20 years and our company's completely shifted from one to the other. Now it's a lot easier because my kids are independent and, half of them are driving and I've gotten the hang of it a little bit better. But when they were little, it was really hard. And I think a lot of women, kind of going back to y'all's conversation about like, why are women asked, how do you do it all? And some men, Matt specifically, has never asked it. And I think it's because we, a lot of women do step back and stay home. But, really, and I can't quote all the researches that you do, Mike. I'm sure you can like go find all the facts on this, but I am certain that women are leaning into their careers earlier on. And what we don't want to be told is, can you have it all, right? Do you have to
Yeah.
choose between family and work? And I don't think men, are they don't feel like they make that choice. I think
Okay.
that you guys.
I've got a great quote for you on this, Katie.
Okay.
Jamie Dimon was talking about this exact subject, and he was talking about how he mentors women that are leaders within Morgan Chase. And he said, it's really simple, but it's great. He said, you can have it all, but not all at once.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
kind
just
of like
thought
my
that's
seasons,
the
right?
best way to say it, right?
Yeah.
That like, yes, it's not like you have to choose, is it career or is it family? Or is it health or is it career? But the idea that you can simultaneously keep 8 plates spinning and do it with excellence is just unrealistic. And that I think that's when people feel really under the pile. And this is probably, the downside of social media and the downside of only seeing the highlight part of people's life. It's like,
Oh,
oh,
because it makes the
well,
pressure unreal, right? Like
yeah,
for
it's like,
everybody.
okay, I've got a friend who just their child's 5th birthday party, they somehow literally brought an elephant to their house and they were doing elephant rides. And then this other friend was in Tahiti on this amazing vacation. And this other friend just got promoted to vice president. And this other friend, they're posting gym workout videos. How do they look like that? And you kind of conglomerate these things like it's one person. Like that
Mm.
somehow like people are doing all these things and it's not. What you're seeing is other individuals who have decided to maximize for a particular thing and are doing it really well. And you can just, it's just so easy to fill under the pile, right?
It is. And if you read about it too, a lot of people like to say, "Oh, well, hire, right? Hire help." And I think, it's easy to hire somebody that can clean your house. And I'm talking specifically about, couples or, husband, wife, whatever partners that both are working, because then you don't have one person at home making sure laundry's done, making sure the kids are fed, like all the things. And so, yes, you can hire, a housekeeper and help you do that, but there's a lot of things that you can't hire for. And as a CEO, that's hard, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to hire somebody to go pick up my child when they're sick at school, you know?
Yeah. It's hard to hire trust. It's hard to hire
Yeah.
judgment.
And I guess you could, but then it goes back to like what you're saying, the pressure of, not being the best parent you can. And
Could
I
and
think,
should.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
should, right? Like I don't want somebody else to go and pick it up. And that's part of why we're entrepreneurs is, we get the ability to define our own life. And I think that's a huge advantage to it. But had I not leaned into starting a company at the same time that I was starting a family, would I be where I am today? Right. It would have been like putting kind of the brakes on a little bit because maybe I was worried that I couldn't do it all. And I think that whole, you can't do it all thing does make sense in the thought of seasons. Like maybe, health falls to the, or relationships or travel. But, I'm kind of here to say, I think you can actually do it all with a really good definition of partnership. And that's where I think people are leaning into now. And maybe it's why, Mike, because it's your wife work? I forget.
She right now she's a stay-at-home, but she's really leaned into philanthropy and volunteering. And
Yeah.
the other issue that we have that's very challenging, and this is a whole nother dynamic, is that she's a full-time caregiver.
Yeah.
She like
To
one
like
of her
parents.
parents
Yeah.
to a parent,
Uh,
and that is like that's the kind of thing you can't plan for, and has
Oh, no,
been
and it's a job. There's no
oh yeah,
question that
it's
what both of
been
your wives
very
are doing,
disruptive.
yeah, are
oh no,
jobs.
there's no question. You
And
know,
the hardest part about the caregiving thing is it's not a chosen job.
No, it's
Like,
not.
it's one thing to be like, "Oh, I'm choosing to, have this extra thing." And I think that this is one of the things about life is that sometimes life just says, "No, you're going to do this thing." And, then you're kind of building around it. But I think there's probably 2 different routes we could go in this conversation. I think that they're both fantastic. I'm gonna come back to one of them in a minute. But, like, the first one I wanna talk about because we've got a really diverse group of people that listen to the pod, and I just want to make a connective thread that I hope everybody's hearing. This is not just about CEOs talking about work-life balance. The issue of women who really do want to focus on their career and have a significant career, but also want to have families. Like this is a major theme that I'm seeing. And for those of you that are men, especially that are listening to this, being aware and empathetic and strategic about how you handle that, I think is going to be a major driver of success in the future. Because if you want to acquire and retain the best female talent, you're going to have to be thinking about this dimension and you're going to have to be thinking about how do I create a work environment where
Environment.
they're able to do that, right? Like one of the things we just announced and we're really excited to do it. Uh, we're giving a $500 per month childcare credit to everybody at the company,
Oh, I love
and we
that.
want to do more at some point. But it's like, I mean, we literally had employees when we were announcing that start to cry because it's like, I mean, it's the
No,
equivalent
and
of
it's
like a
so
10%
hard.
raise for some people.
That's right. And if you and this is across like your entire company, and if you think about it, when a lot of people are straight out of college and starting their careers, childcare can be equivalent to their income.
oh
And
yeah.
so it's very hard for women especially to make that decision of, well, what am I working for if I'm just breaking even? And I think it's
Absolutely.
important to think of it too as it's an investment, right? Like doing this now and and there's so many studies. I mean, I'm about kids in daycare. Like I think if, and nannies, and there's a lot of grandparents that step in and help out, but specifically daycare. And when it's a break even with your salary, I think that men and women kind of look at it and say, well, what am I doing this for? And I do think it's important to recognize that it is a bit of an investment in your future. it's something I had to make the decision of. I mean, I thought for sure when I was starting the company and I had my newborn, at home in my lap, breastfeeding while I'm like taking a phone call, I've made the decision of putting him into daycare because there is no, a lot of people are like, well, if I could work from home, I can also do the babies. No, you can't. What's harder
Hmm.
than, running a company is running a company while you have your children. And I mean, I tell people all the time, like, I am a better mother in the mornings and in the evenings and on the weekends. And during the day, I really shift my hats from, I can always go back to being a mom in the moment, right? That it needs me. And I think that's important for your staff too. I mean, if one of my, all of our leadership is all moms. And if one of them comes to me and says, daycare just called and baby's got a fever, I mean, we don't blink. Like, it's
Yeah.
absolutely go get them, and a lot of them have supportive husbands too that will help, but a lot of them don't. And I think
Hmm.
that, that's an important thing to recognize too with your staff is, how much, are they carrying at their home life? And people like to say, like, you don't bring your, family life to work, but I don't
Oh,
believe in
that's
that at
that's
all.
that's just absurd.
It is
It's
absurd.
absurd to believe that. Like,
Yeah.
it's a lack of self-awareness if
Yeah.
you think that an argument you
That they
have
don't
with your wife
merge
at
completely.
8:30. Yeah, it's like if I have
Yeah.
an argument with my wife at 8:30 and then I've got a one-on-one at 9, I am going to be in a different headspace. Like, I
Absolutely.
would like to think I have good self-control, I have good coping mechanisms, but it's like it's just a reality. Like, if
Yeah, no,
my
you're
kid is
probably an
sick,
asshole in that one-on-one.
yeah, well, hopefully not too bad, but
Yeah,
even if I'm not, I could be less engaged, I could be unhelpful, I could be kind of emotionally unavailable. Like, if one of our
totally.
kids is sick and we're worried about that, like the ability to focus at work. And so I just think in general, like, this is an area where we just have to be realistic that, like, hey, our family lives are going to deeply impact the way that that we come to work every day. And so, like, that's just what it is, whether, right, wrong, or whatever. It's just the way that it is.
Yeah, and
But I want
imagine
to
if you have a community at work where people are supporting each other with that, right? Like, where it is
absolutely.
like, I'm going through maybe a divorce, or my kids are really sick, or my mother has cancer. And, the teams are stepping up to kind of support each other. We really support that too. I mean, I believe in, like, let your team know, like, is something going on at home that maybe is affecting your work? Because I think people truly want to be compassionate with it.
Well, and there's some work cultures where
Mhm.
family's not valued,
Oh,
like where it's
it's
like
horrible.
it's like, hey, we're going out to the strip club afterwards Friday night, and like it's very difficult. I mean, I would just kind of say this goes back to culture that, like, either you have a culture which is family friendly or you don't. And so if you don't, then you're going to lose. You're not going to be able to retain people that want that to be a priority in their life. And I know that there've been really successful companies built where, basically family was the last thing. It was very deprioritized. But for us, at least, we've made it a really big part of our focus, which I think has really helped us. It sounds like every time I hear a story about your company, Katie, I get the same impression. Matt, I'd be curious how you guys think about it with your companies, like emphasis on family and trying to create that kind of culture.
All right, let's take a quick break and we're going to thank our sponsor, Postscript. Okay, here's what I want to talk about. There's been this trend in e-commerce where we're trying to get to like all-in-one solutions. So like SMS, email, everything's in one place. And I think there's a bunch of weird arguments for this. I think this is all BS. Like, I would rather have a solution that is like point built and is great for that one thing. This is why I like Postscript. This is why we use Postscript. They do SMS, they do it really freaking well. Right. And I hate to tell you, I say I told you so, but a lot of brands have gone to like the all in one thing to try to integrate email and SMS, and they've just moved back. And they do it for a bunch of reasons. Oh, it's easier for attribution. It's easier on my marketing team to log into one place. I think that's all BS. Look, the reason we like Postscript is all they think about, they eat and breathe SMS, which means my team is constantly getting access to new features before anybody else. They're actually consulting with us and helping us get better at SMS. I think this like, oh, email and SMS need to be integrated to make SMS more effective is a lie. The reality is most of us aren't sending enough email and most of us aren't sending enough SMS. So trying to like trigger one off the other is likely just a waste of time. And I don't know too many brands personally who can tell me straight faced that this has been a big benefit to them. So in my view and my experience, like the reason we like having Postscript as a sponsor is because we use it and it works really well. And the team is great. Their support's awesome. Their pricing is awesome. So that's my shout out to Postscript. It's wicked to have them as a sponsor for the pod. Let's get back to the show. I don't even know if, I guess like for me, it's not necessarily an emphasis on family, but do you value the role of a caregiver? Right. And if you do broadly, then you wind up being a lot more empathetic to all of the circumstances that come up, whether it's like, oh, one of my kids is sick, or I am taking care of a parent. Like we have an employee where they are the primary caregiver for a sick parent. So I think value, like it does come down to values. Like it sounds kind of hokey for people listening, but like if you build a company and it starts with you, if you're the leader,
That's what I was
everything
just
is
going
top
to say.
down.
And I think for everybody listening too, on all right levels, it does start with you,
Yeah.
And kind of setting the tone and the expectations with it.
But I do think I want to go back to also this idea of balance and like how much you can have, having it all that stuff. So I will let me caveat this with, I have a lot of friends who are entrepreneurs. Many are couple entrepreneurs. Just a weird life circumstance. I'm just surrounded by them. I can't think of one who is like the most successful, like the extreme end, who are also great at health and family all at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that like everybody just needs to know who's listening. I think everybody struggles with that, of
But I think it
having
can
it all
shift.
sorted.
Don't you agree? Like sometimes I feel like my relationship is healthier or my friendships are
Totally.
healthier. And sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm killing it. Like I'm going to Pilates once a week.
Totally. It's seasons for sure.
Yeah.
I will say though, I got this trick from my buddy Dan Martell, where we started as a couple. So Jen and I now do, and this is sort of again, we're pulling from the business world into our relationship, but we started doing annual planning and then quarterly check-ins. And this has helped immensely in just like the operation of our house, like our home. And then also like making sure that we each have room for health and friendships and things that we like to do. And sort of sitting down, and I'm like, this might sound crazy, but like my wife and I literally plan out 90 days all at once. Like we sit down with calendars and we sync up everything, who's doing drop off and who's doing pickup. Because Katie, like you, like we decided early on, we don't want to outsource parenting. I will hire for everything else. I have somebody who picks up dog shit in the backyard. We have a house cleaner. Somebody washes the cars. Like I'll hire for everything, just not parenting.
Yeah.
Right. Like I want to be there for my kids' things, every play, every sporting activity. Like I want to do as much as I can. But this notion of just sitting down and planning out every single damn day has helped so much, because then it's like the whole reality versus expectations thing in our relationship. Now we've sort of said like, okay, look, on these days, I'm going mountain biking and you're doing these things on these days. And like, we literally block off all the time.
And I feel like you're giving each other permission, right? So it's not like it's kind of we already agreed to this. So there's no, if you come home from work and you had a hard day, but your kids were terrible and your wife's stressed out, like whose turn is it then?
Yes.
And I think that's awesome. I mean, I definitely think that when you are choosing the lifestyle of running your own company, and which means you take it home with you, right? Like, let's be real. There's plenty of people out there that
you're not Batman.
Yeah.
Last I checked, Katie, you don't wear a cape to work.
No, I mean,
with a mask. Like you're not a different
not
person.
Always. Yeah.
She
might. Sometimes. Yeah.
She might.
I
Only
might.
on Tuesdays.
I might have to. Yeah. Just to get it all done. But I think efficiency, kind of like what you're talking about, like really understanding that your life has to not be micromanaged, but like just getting things done, because it can pile up so quickly at home, just like it does at work. And I remember reading this one time where it talked about if it takes less than 2 minutes to do, you should do it right then and there in the moment. So this can be even like something like taking your coffee mug, right, from your bathroom and putting it straight into the dishwasher. Like don't let coffee mugs accumulate and go forward.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something that takes more than 2 minutes, then plan it out, be strategic about it, and keep it organized. And And I love everything that you're saying, Matt, but what I keep thinking about is, but what about the people where they both have jobs and then they also have to coordinate the family aspect of it?
Yeah.
And that's really hard. I've always said, like, if I could just have a stay-at-home husband, yeah, and I have several very successful friends that have stay-at-home husbands, but I also have a majority of friends that have two working, parents.
Yeah,
And I
most of
think,
my friends are in that camp, Katie, and a lot of us have adopted this, like, it's actually even more helpful to really focus on the calendar.
yeah,
I know this sounds like it's not gonna solve everything, but I do find it, like, at least in my network, that,
I think
because
it
like,
keeps
a
the
calendar gives
resentment
you a good
out.
window,
Yeah, and it keeps the
right?
resentment out, right? Like, how much you're committing to, and she knows how much she's committing to with it.
What you guys said, just to kind of crystallize the point, ambitious people tend to marry ambitious people, or they tend to pair with ambitious people. And so it's not surprising that, like, somebody really ambitious is going to find a spouse and is going to have kids that want to do a lot of things and are not going to just want to sit at home and eat bonbons. And like, you should expect that. I think the word I would use to describe what we're talking about is intentionality. That
Mhm.
really, like, the more you want to try and do with your life, the more intentional you're going to have to be.
Oh my
And
gosh, yes.
as opposed to accidental. Like, accidental is just not going to work anymore. And I'll go back to an idea. Katie, you said something, and I want to kind of layer on my philosophy here, which is that if you think about all the things in your life that are important, like waves, then the way that it's interesting, like whether you're talking about hit training or learning or anything else, the way that our body actually thrives is usually when, like, you give it real challenge and then you let it rest, and then you give it real challenge and then you let it rest. So I actually think this is true of just about any area of our life, that it's this kind of work life idea that, hey, what I've got to do is kind of understand, okay, steady state, this is what work should be every day, this is what relationships should be every day, this is what, exercise should be every day, is unrealistic for most people, especially people that are doing something like running a company. And so I like the wave model better. The way that I think about it is I've got 4 or 5 waves that are really important to me. Now you can't have 10, you can't have 20, doesn't work, but you can have a handful. So like we've mentioned, it's like, okay, my friendships, my marriage, my children, my work, my health, spirituality, whatever. We'll say there's like 5 or 6 things. And the way that I think about them is I think about them like waves, and I'm trying to lay those waves on top of each other where I'm hitting peaks at different times. So the way that that will practically look is
God, I
that
feel like my life's like a tsunami. there's there's no waves in my life. I mean, I love where you're going with this, but I just picture myself and I'm like, I just feel like I'm getting slapped in the face with like tidal waves once a month.
well, and I don't know if
But
it's
keep
perfect, but
going. I'm learning.
the way that I try and do this, and I'll give a really, practical example, that next week I will go to China, and I'm going to be in China for 6 days. So 100% of parenting is on my wife while I'm in China, and we actually just recently had a senior leadership retreat. We invite all the spouses, and I gave a speech at it. One of the things I said was, I'm very intentional about inviting everybody to this because you're all contributing. Some of you get paid and some of you are contributing but don't get paid for it. Like, when you take 100% of the responsibilities with the family so that your spouse can go to China or can go to this trade show or whatever, like, you're serving the company just like your spouse is. But anyway, so I'm going to China, and the way that I think about it is that's a wave up, right? Like, that's a week where I'm giving just about everything to the company. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on either side of that wave, I'm going to wave down where I minimize. So like Friday, I think I'm going to take Friday all the way off. I usually have one-on-ones, but several of those people are going with me to China. I'm going to take it all the way off. I'm going to spend time with my wife, and I'm going to try and wave up with her on Friday. And then she knows on the other side of China, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to minimize the work strain that week so that I can give more family investment. And I basically try and do this with the important areas of my life, is I'm kind of saying, hey, there are periods where I'm going to have to kind of power down some, and I'm not going to be able to focus on whatever lifting or exercise or, my kids. But you better believe that when, get over the crest with this work responsibility or whatever else, that then I'm going to intentionally try and ramp up in putting focus and attention towards this other thing. And it's not perfect, but I think it's a much more workable model because the idea of steady state just doesn't work. Like basically the moment that anything unpredictable happens at work or at home, it blows up your entire model. And so the other thing is I try to really communicate to the people in my life how important they are to me, and that, sometimes when I'm not able to be as present, the reasons for that. So like, for example, if with my kids, we would have conversations about like, hey, why do you have to work? And I'm like, well, here are the reasons I have to work. I have to work to provide for the family. I have to work so that we can hopefully make an impact with the company. I have to work because I'm serving all the other people that work for us, whatever. And I'm giving them vision for it. And that's pretty different too than just not having any vision for the times where they're getting less of my attention, that it's just somebody else is getting it and they're not, and they're upset about it. They're more partnering with me in it. So anyway, I don't know if it's helpful, but for me as a model, it's been really helpful.
No,
And I'm about
Counselor
to
Mike,
have to
thank you.
apply it.
I feel very like I want to live in that. And I think a lot of people want to live in that idea of like, focus and you can drive. But I mean, for me, I feel like I literally have 10 balls in the air. And, I have this rule with my kids on like, you get to sign up for one thing at a time. And I think there's a lot of parents probably listening there's a lot of pressure now. And this didn't exist when we were little. I did one thing at a time, but now it's like select baseball and select football and cheer and dance and volleyball. And you can't just play volleyball. You have to join a team. It has to be a select team. You have to travel with it. I'm in cheer hell right now.
Yeah.
And, for anybody that's got a daughter coming up the ranks and interested in cheerleading, it is worse than select baseball or any of the others. And I would love to be able to like really disconnect and go to these 3-day long cheer competitions, but I take my laptop with me. And, if I have to miss work on Friday to go to the cheer competition because I want to be a present mother, right? Then I do take it with me. And sometimes I'll go sit in the bleachers and get caught up on work. And then, for the 2 minutes that they perform, I'm full, all in and listening. And I think a lot of parents probably find themselves more in a multitasking state constantly. And it's exhausting. Like if we're being real, like it is exhausting working, running a company, raising children, keeping your marriage alive, like having friends, doing all the things, posting about something on social media, right? And like keeping up with the Joneses. And maybe that's something that more women put pressure on themselves on than men. I don't know. But I will like very vocally for cheer comps, they'll have, a parents meeting that's mandatory in the middle of the day. And I get on the like band app,
Yeah.
because they make you sign up these apps. And I'm like, no, I will not be there. I think boundaries, which is something we really haven't touched on, but boundaries for me have become very beneficial in the way that I manage work and home. And I actually have better boundaries, I think, at home than I even do with work. Work, I tend to, I'll come home, I stop, have dinner with the kids, make, dinner, do all the things. The second they're in bed or I feel like I've given them what they need from me, man, I am back on my laptop, right? Checking
But I
emails.
think this is a great point, Katie. And I'm going to challenge you and everybody listening to this. I think boundaries at work are incredibly important. I think the way that you can experience more of the life you want to is by forcing other people to take responsibility. And that is painful. And especially when you're a gifted person, people will just shovel stuff on you. Oh, Katie will take care of it. And you have to draw strong boundaries and be like, no, I'm not. You're going to sink or float, because I guess I will say this. It's not quick to get people under you that you trust, where you can really empower other people. It's not quick. It takes years. But it is game changing. Like for me, it is a game changer that at any point, if I needed to just go away for a week, I know the company could completely function. It would be in good hands. And I don't have a single bit of fear about that, because that's empowering. Going back to my example, if I come back from China, I don't care what I have on my schedule. If I feel like I need to clear 72 hours to just be around my family or to do whatever, I can do it. And I don't
Oh,
have
at
a
the drop of a
second thought
hat.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's because I've hired great people, but also because I forced them to take responsibility. And I think this is a point where a lot of talented people fall down, is that they do not set good boundaries at work. They overtake responsibility, and then they feel kind of, chained basically to their job in a
Yeah.
way that you don't have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
they
and I
overfunction.
think that we have to take into consideration there's people that really love their job. And I've gone through moments
Absolutely.
even with Caden Lane that I'm like, oh man, like I'm burned out, right? I'm done. I'm not able to do XYZ at home, or this is affecting other aspects of my life. I'm burned out. And then like overnight something can change, right? And I'm like, I wake up on a Monday morning and I can't wait to get to work because I'm so excited about something. And I think that that can happen at work and at home too. And what you're talking about with boundaries and expectations at work, which I completely agree at. It's very, very important to make sure that you have a team that you can, at the drop of the hat, leave. I think equally so for your team members. Like if one of them's having a baby, right? Are they going to feel
Yep.
confident that their team, members are going to support them while they're gone on maternity? But going back to the kid aspect too, I use the same thing with my children. And it's harder when they're little. But I think putting expectations back on kids, and we talked about, even, I want to touch on the subject of finance and kind of going into the whole, because we're all successful entrepreneurs. Like, how do we not raise entitled children, that are assholes, like I
Yeah.
like to go back
Yeah.
to, right? But I put a lot of expectations on my kids. And just like you guys, I get asked by them, like, well, mom, why aren't you at, donuts with dad or whatever? And I have to explain to them, even the youngest one, well, this is why, because this is, something that's going on. It's not because I don't want to be there, but this is what's important, and whatever the situation may be. But even at home, I mean, my kids, they do their own laundry even though we have a housekeeper. They put their dishes in the dishwasher. Like, they have set budgets and expectations. And I think our children are more capable than probably we realize. And as your kids
100%.
get older and you look back, you're like, they were absolutely like pulling the wool over my eyes. They could have done that themselves. This is not something I'm proud of, but I hate reading books to my children. Like, it made me more tired than it made them when they were little. Like, I'd sit in the chair and read them the book, and it would literally, my eyes would be rolling back in my head. And I was so paranoid that I would be sending them off to kindergarten, and like they were just not, they were going to always be in kindergarten because I never read to them as a parent. I was a terrible
Right.
mother and the whole thing. And man, they figured out how to read so well. They did so good. The teachers would call me for like the parent teacher conference, and they're like, "Oh, they're doing wonderful at reading." And I would like sit there and I'd kind of like be like, "Oh my God, like this is, such a scam." But then I'd tell the teachers, "Well, I didn't do it. You guys did that." And it's just kind of a little example that, not that I'm promoting, like, don't read to your children, they'll figure it out on their own, but also they'll figure it out on their own.
Well,
And
there's
I
also
think,
so many ways to do things, Katie. I
oh
think
my
this is
God,
like
yes.
there's
There's
no one right way to do any of this, and
no,
I think that's
including running a company. There is
totally
no
Yeah.
one, yeah, there's no
raising
one way.
kids, having like trying to figure your family out, your health out. There's no one way to do this, even though like most content I find on the internet is like this is the only way to do
Oh yeah.
something,
No, it's
or even
ridiculous.
books, right? Like this is the only way to
Yeah.
do
Well,
something.
Yeah.
everybody's marriage is different. Everybody's kids are different. This is where I think the principle is: are you being intentional? Or are you being deliberate? Is there a reason
Yes.
why you're doing the things that you're doing?
Yeah.
And
Is it
Katie, I
for
think
you
you
and
hit
is
on
it for
another.
somebody else too? Is a good
Yeah,
question to ask.
exactly. And Katie, I think you hit on an important point that I would call out, which is one of the things that can sabotage us is that we like being needed and we like being wanted. And that can cause us to do exactly what you're talking about, where we allow people to be overly dependent on us when we should be forcing them to take agency and to be responsible for themselves, whether that's our kids, whether that's the people at work or whatever. And so some of this, I mean, usually the problems here, I guess I'd frame it this way. I'm convinced that when people complain about work life, it's usually the calls coming from inside the house. Like, the problems are the way that you're managing yourself and less about the external circumstances. And like, I get it. It's tough. There's challenging, life's pulling you in a bunch of different directions. But the reason why you're feeling the way that you're feeling is because of a need to manage yourself in a different way. Like, if you think about it, there's just so few things that we quote unquote have to do in a day. I guess we have to drink water and we have to eat food or we will die, But like once you get past like the basic necessities for living, we don't quote unquote have to do almost anything. It's all stuff that we've chosen to do and that we have put on ourselves. And then we can kind of make ourselves the victim, like, oh, I've got so much on my plate. How am I ever going to do this? And it's like, you're doing this to yourself, right? Like that. So, and
I'm
when you
really good
start
at
with,
just cutting that shit out. Like
well,
anything
you're very
side
no
up.
nonsense, which again
Yeah.
is why I think like having you on this is it's a great other voice. But I think the thing that I would encourage people to do is to take personal agency and say, hey, if there is something in your life that you don't like the way that it is,
Change
it's
it.
because of choices you're making,
That's right.
right? And you can change it.
You can change it. And people hate change. Why? Like I thrive in change. I mean, and you can change it. And if it doesn't work, you can change it again. And I think that
Yeah.
even is important for people to hear. I mean, one of, I've in the past year or two, I've kind of leaned into this community of like all of these brands and people talking to each other. And this hasn't existed in a very long time. And I think that there is so much support that people can give each other and on a professional level and then also on a personal level, Mike, like you're saying. I mean, and Matt, I love that you guys like sit down and you go through like a 60-day plan. I think really if you have a partner that can help you, support you in your personal life, and then you've got a great workforce that can help support you in your professional life, then yeah, I mean, it's great. I just I feel like that's an ideal. And I think a lot of people are struggling with one or the other at any given time, right? And then you
Mhm.
kind of put your focus on like work, like maybe work's been hard and you're whatever, like your growth rate's down or you're not hitting your goals or whatever that may be. You tend to shift, all your effort into that because you feel like that's what's on fire. And
Right.
Yeah.
sometimes it's the other things in your life that can really suffer for it. And I think open communication, like I definitely support, having kind of that open communication that we talked about, bring your family life to work, but also take your work back home too. And not the stresses of it, but let your partner understand what's going on. Because even in a relationship that's perfectly 50-50, right? And that's what me and my current husband do because we both have successful careers. And so it's very much like, if I cook, you clean. And there's no maybe, right? Like I don't enable, like you talked about, Mike, where I can put the dishes in the dishwasher, but our
Mhm.
agreement is that if I cook, I get to like I'm 10 years old and leave my plate right on the sink and then, go off and have my own time, and
Right.
or vice versa. But I, not everything is going to be the same every day. And it's really hard to manage your life balance, right?
For sure.
If you could just plan it, like, well, work's gonna be great. Like, we're going into Black Friday, Cyber Monday. We're gonna kill it. So I'm gonna have a little extra time to focus on my personal relationship or my kids or whatever. And then something blows up, right, at
Yeah.
work or at home, and I think that
Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right?
punched in the
It's
face.
it's
Yes.
so I've got two concepts to kind of to add at the end here that I think are really helpful. Here's the first. Scarcity creates focus. And here's what I would argue. We generally dislike it when we feel like there are more things that we would like to do than time that we have, right? It
Yeah.
feels like we're failing. It feels like something's wrong. And I would make the argument that that is proof that you're doing things right. That when there are more interesting things that you would like to get to than time, that's actually exactly where you want to be because it's a forcing function that will help you to prioritize and evaluate the things in your life and to funnel your times toward their time towards the things that are truly the most important. And that is actually living life well. It's not that you get to all the things. It's that the things that you put your time towards are actually worthy of that time.
There's also this. Okay, so on the flip side of that, Mike, there's also a lot to be said about. We also try to just do way too much,
I agree.
like it broadly, right? And entrepreneurs are really guilty of this. That this concept of like doing more somehow means more, like we're more productive, we're going to be more successful. It's actually the inverse is likely true in most things. It's like you just need to do less, but better, right? So like depth versus breadth. And I also think that people aren't honest with themselves. So like,
No.
if you're going to say like, my number one priority is my family, show me your fucking calendar and I'll tell you if that's
Yeah.
true.
There's a great at the end of Breaking Bad. I don't know if you guys have seen Breaking Bad, but like the arc of Breaking Bad is basically this guy who gets cancer and he's like, I'm going to cook meth so that when I die, I leave my family with all this money. And the
Right.
entire show, he's getting to be an increasingly worse person, but he keeps telling himself this lie that he's doing it for the family. He's
Yes.
doing it for the family. And then in the last episode, he's finally able to admit to his then estranged wife, I was doing it for me.
Yep.
And the worst person you can lie to is yourself. And there are often times where we find ourselves in dynamics and we want to say, oh, it's my environment or circumstances, or it's because this happened at work, but it's actually choices that we're making. And the beginning of actually, improving the dynamics and changing things is saying like, no, I'm driving this, right?
Yeah.
It's my need to quote unquote be successful. It's my need to be viewed this certain way. It's my need to hit this number. It's my insecurity over here. And the moment that we're able to be honest with ourselves about that, we can start to actually like change things. But until then,
Yeah.
it's like, we're not going to be very successful at it.
Yeah, man. Like Black
No.
Friday, it's coming up. This is my 16th or 17th Black Friday, where it's just intense, right? In some form or another. So like going into this, I don't have to say this anymore, but I would go into this and I would just tell my wife, I'm going to be a really bad husband and a really terrible father for the next like week and a half. Like, I'm just not going to be around. Like this is it. This is like the whole damn year comes down to like this sort of week and a half and kicking off holiday. And I'm going to be bad. I'm going to be bad at these jobs. My health's not going to be great. I'm going to eat like shit. I'm probably going to drink too much. And it's just this period of time. But setting that expectation up front, now it's funny. Like we're at the beginning of November. My mother-in-law is showing up and Jen's like, it's perfect timing. She's like, I know you're going to be a shitty husband this month anyway. So like
That's
the
great.
next 2 weeks, don't worry about me.
Yeah.
I've arranged it all. So I find that being brutally honest with yourself and with your partner, even with your kids as they get older, like Katie, like
For
you
sure.
said, here's why I'm not here.
Yeah.
Like when we were in Italy a couple weeks ago, we were walking around in Rome. We stopped in at a restaurant, had dinner. And as we were walking back, I could hear my wife talking to my daughter about, this is why daddy works. It's so that we can do things like this. And she's 9. So she's starting to get this stuff, right? She's starting to understand the concept of like shit costs money. Like, but you could still hear it. Like at that age, they still struggle with this like how complex some of this stuff is. My thing, like my view of it all is simply, Mike, I love the intentional piece, obviously, but I think we'd all be a lot better off if we were just honest about what our real priorities were. Like, it's fine. If your company's your number one priority, great, but don't lie to yourself.
Pretend like it might be home too. Yeah.
Yeah. And and if you don't like that it isn't, then that is a choice. Like, dude, the thing that we don't, like, entrepreneurs don't like to talk about is like, maybe just don't go for more.
Yeah.
I know,
like,
but I'm listening to you guys and I'm like, but also go for both. Like, you can
Sure.
be very successful at work and you can also be very helpful and successful in parenting and your relationship at home.
100%.
I don't get why there's so much separation. And I think that we do overbook ourselves, right? Because it's just like the kind of people that we are. But perfection is overrated. And I think that if you can really just think of the concept of it's better done, like it's better complete, right?
Yeah.
Than not. And I'm sometimes I like to think of it as I'm half-assing it at work and I'm half-assing it as a mother and at home and as a partner and all the things. But maybe that's the secret. Like, maybe the secret is not being absolutely perfect at all the things.
Progress over perfection
So that you can
is
have all
usually
the things.
a good way.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think
Yeah.
that the reality is the important things in life are a lot more about duration than about intensity. And, like, how do you be a good parent? You stay engaged in your kid's life for decades. That's how you do it, And it's like, it's not that, you had one really awesome trip to Disneyland where you were really there, but then they didn't see you for the next 10 months. It's like, no, you're engaged over time. And here's another thing about parenting that I think is really powerful. It's true about managing people. Your kids don't need you to be perfect. Your kids will actually do worse if they think you are perfect.
Yep.
Your kids seeing the struggle, your kids seeing imperfection, your kids hearing you talk through the difficulty you experience and how you're wrestling with things, that's the good stuff. That's
Yeah.
what helps them to develop when you let them
They
inside
learn
of your head.
totally,
They
and
learn
they
through
learn by
osmosis.
osmosis,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So on all aspects of it, I think, and I'd say even people at work too, I think people just innately learn by watching. And I think that's probably one of the most valuable gifts I'm giving my children, right? As a working parent, is I'm showing them how you can love what you do, how you can give back, how you can change people's lives, that a job isn't necessarily a bad word.
Yeah.
Mike, the thing that's helped me a lot, I had a coach years ago telling me this. It's the total opposite of what you're told your whole life. But he said to me, he's like, dude, the thing that most people get wrong is that life is long,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're told our whole lives, life is short, life is short, life is short. It's like, no, it's kind of long. And so for me, as a parent, I have made a choice to say, during these 0 to 16, 17, 18 years old, I don't know when my kid's going to not like me anymore, or like when they're going to kind of, want their
There's no
friends more.
reason. There's no reason that that's ever it's
Actually, it's
interesting.
definitely going to happen at like 15.
When her friends become like more
Oh,
important than her.
I don't believe it. My kids will always like me, Katie. You can't tell me
No,
otherwise.
I'm certain that your daughters around the age of 15 are going to definitely not
This
like
is
you.
it. So like my wife is like, it's going to happen. But this,
Yeah.
I will
So
always be
I've made
cool.
this
My kids
choice.
will always like me.
No, they won't.
Denial's
They
a
won't.
powerful thing, Mike. It's really cute on you, but let
It's
us know
nice.
in a couple of years.
But it's not going to happen. But this is the thing, Mike, and I think for entrepreneurs, we struggle with this, which is, and I think it mostly comes down to patience. But like I've made a choice to spend a weird amount of time with my kid. And when you look at it in relation to like my job, my relation, like my friendships, I spend a lot of time with my kid, but she's only going to be this age for so long, right? Before like she is going to mature and these things are going to change. And all because life is long. Like, could I do more in business right now? Yeah, of course. But I'm 43, man. Like when she's 15, 16, I'll be 50. I'll do it then. I can work. You can work when you're in your 50s. You can do this kind of work. It's knowledge work. I'm not swinging a hammer. I'm not doing something that my body is going to fail on. Right. So I think a lot of us, if you're having kids, like I've got a few friends that have got young kids now. And like the advice I give people is like, look, if you really want to have a great relationship with your kids, then you're going to need to put your calendar towards that. And if you're going to put your calendar towards that, it's going to have to come out of something else.
And be present.
And
make
be super
sure that
present.
when you're there and you're committed, and you don't have to commit to all the things. Like I think there is things that are important that you need to be a part of with your children, and there are things that aren't. And just because another parent is there for
Totally.
100% because that's their job, right? And their only job, then, you don't, I looking back, and my kids are grown now and in college. So I agree with what you're saying, Matt. Life is long, but gosh, it goes fast.
Yeah.
And now that my kids are extremely independent and living in different states, or half of them are, there's a lot of times where you look back and go, oh my God, did I do it right? Like, was I there? And I think for entrepreneurs, especially ones that are starting off their families now, and it's very early on, everything you do, if you can just plant the seed in your head of, if my kids look back on this, right, when they have children, how are they going to remember their childhood? And I grew up I had a very entrepreneurial, successful mother. And I think that's why I never thought you had to pick one or the other, right? Whereas I think some women do think they have to pick one or the other, family, career. And I think that that's the gift we give our children now. Like you were saying, y'all's kids are watching you. Like they're watching everything about it. And they're making, whether they know it or not, in their brains, they're trying to figure out, like, do I want to do what dad does? Or do I want to do what mom does? And why? Does it make them happy? Or do they always come home angry? And, and can I have, kind of going back to the osmosis thing, I think just being very aware that, we have a lot of responsibility. We have responsibility over our companies, over our staff, over our customers, over our families, and over our children. And, I don't think perfection is expected of us, even though we think it is. But I think the reality is it's just, if you put love into a lot of things, right? And it's with goodwill, especially with parenting in general. And I mean, I have a very open communication with my daughter. My youngest is 12. And like you said, she made the comment to you about, well, this is, or I guess your wife told her that this is why dad works so hard. I do the same thing, but in my own words, right? So I will say, this is why mommy does this, or I make sure she's aware of the things that we're doing even at work,
Yeah.
to help
Mhm.
We absolutely use Northbeam, and me specifically, every day. I'm constantly in there building out reports. And I remember when we brought it on a couple years ago, and I got to meet Austin, who is the founder, and he is fabulous. And he was selling me on the idea of, not using in platform and really using a separate platform as like our source of truth, which is what we needed. And I mean, it has been a deal breaker for us. It's helped us scale in areas and on platforms that we didn't even, weren't getting a good read on. And it's helped us optimize for our channels that we really had a lot of high spend on. And their team is great. My favorite part is taking the calls with them where they, dive deep into the insights, and they've always got really great information for us. So yeah, I love Northbeam. We wouldn't be where we are at today without them.
I guess like what I want to know from both of you is how are you handling the money thing? So like teaching, either whether it's teaching your kids about money and or sort of like principles and rules and like just your family values and culture around it. Like, not raising in a spoiled brat being probably the thing that most people who have some success are thinking about with their kids. Like Mike, how does this, how intentional are you here? You put a lot of thought into this. I'm just curious.
Very, very intentional. I've done a lot of talking to people. If you talk to wealth advisors, people that do this, they've seen a lot of horror stories. I mean, listen, it is corrosive and it goes badly for a lot of families. I think part of it is just generally most people, the majority of the population, if you let them kind of indulge their whims, it would be really destructive. But most people don't have the means to indulge all their whims, whereas high net worth families, they do. But the a couple of things that we were really intentional about. One is we are really intentional about having kind of family values and family mission. This is what our family's about. This is what we're trying to, accomplish with our family, the way that we're trying to impact the world. And we talk about it. And then I try to make it practical with real life examples. One of mine is that's a really concrete example that's good is how I tip. I bring my kids into how I tip. I talk about why I tip so generously. I tell them the story about when I waited tables. There, and it's really been fun. Like I've gotten in this habit of I leave really big tips. And my kids, I've started to like invite them in, like, okay, how much should we tip this time when it's not their money. So they're like, leave $1,000, like they're really crazy numbers. But like they really have like leaned into this idea of like, hey, we can be generous through tipping. And one of the most fun parts of it is that several times where we've left really big tips, one of my kids has been like, I want to stay behind and watch their face when they see the tip. And I'm like, man, that is powerful that they're seeing the impact of generosity in somebody's life and that it's shaping the way that they're thinking about it. And so what I'm trying to teach them from an early age is this idea of stewardship. And I think a combination of having a clear sense of mission and a clear sense of like stewardship of why do we have money? What's the point of money? What are we trying to accomplish with it? Has been really powerful in their development. And what I see even at these early ages, I mean, my son still is like, he wants to spend $1,000 on Brawl Stars or whatever. Like he has typical little boy things, but I'm seeing the embryonic pieces of him thinking about generosity, thinking about money as it's not exclusively for him, and that I'm encouraged by that. But with all that said, there's also like you mentioned this earlier, Katie. The air we breathe is just so different from the air I breathed when I was a kid. Like my son, when he comes with me to a Thunder game, we sit courtside. And I try to help him understand, like when I was a kid, I could have never sat here and I would have thought this was the coolest thing ever. And for you, this is just another Thunder game. But like, it's hard to help them to really appreciate like some of the things that they get to experience. So I'm not exactly sure. I will say like we've been really intentional in talking to our kids about money, and I'm being really intentional with how we set up our trust and different things. And in general, there are some families that have passed the money to the kids, but most of the families I'm talking to, they're not passing the majority, most of their money onto their kids. They're taking a different approach. So this is another one of those where like, man, there's no right way, but if you're not intentional, it will bite you in the ass. That's
I feel like
probably
we
the
could
one
do
thing
a
I've learned.
whole nother
Oh,
hour
we could
just
totally do a
on
whole another
that.
hour on this.
Well, maybe we'll
Yeah.
Yeah.
come back to it. Katie, what about you? Like, you've got older kids. How
Yeah.
early did you start this with your kids?
I mean, definitely early on. So maybe a little bit of difference between you guys and us is when I started the company, I was 23, 24 years old. So I didn't have a lot.
Mm,
So my oldest birth child, right? I mean, he remembers living in a much smaller home, and he remembers mom working all hours, and he remembers, the drive and that part of it. And so I think he has a little bit of a different respect level than maybe even my youngest now, who came in much later, right, through the path of it. I, like Mike, am a huge believer in not giving your children everything. Our kids understand that what we have is because we've worked very hard for it. And I push very hard on them back on figuring out what they love to do and then figuring out a way that they can make money doing it. And, I've got 3 of them right now picking their majors and picking their careers. And there is no, I too have a trust set up like Matt and like Mike and much, much, much later on in life and keeping me in full control of it, will they even see that? And honestly, I didn't do that to their benefit. It was more for like tax reasons, right? Because I don't want my children to be, to not have something that fulfills them, right? Because like you said, life is very long. And, my mother was an entrepreneur and I grew up with 6 kids. So I'm the oldest of 6 and 5 of them still work for the family business. And so I'm even faced with that, right? Like people ask now, my grown ones, well, are you going to go back and work for Caden Lane? And I'm very much like, nope, no, they're not. They're going to go do their own thing, right? And I want
yeah.
to be there to catch them if they fall, but I really want them to understand, the value of money. My son that's in college in Florida right now actually has about $70 left in his bank account because we give him an allowance, right?
Yeah.
Well, that little guy was Uber Eatsing like Chick-fil-A at $50 a pop, like his whole first month of college, burned through the money. And now he's crying because I'm making him go eat the, completely disgusting free cafeteria food.
Yeah.
But it's also, and I feel bad, right? Like when he calls me and he tells me he's starving, but I know that the right thing to do is for him to understand the consequences of it. And it's not about that I can't afford, right? Like to give him money. And I think, he's not said that. Well, why can't you pay for it? You've got money. And that's where I go back and go, okay, maybe I didn't completely bomb at parenting because my children do have an understanding of it's mine and it's what I worked for. Not that I don't want to share it with them. And really my favorite thing to share it with them on is experiences like
Yeah.
travel, like what you do. I mean, it's, we lived in a very modest home for a very long time when we could have afforded so much more. And, I'm extremely aware of my children and not raising entitled kids.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
making them responsible for their choices. I think as early as middle school, they are very capable of managing a budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we're not quite there yet. Like Olive's 9.
Yeah.
She's
She's in 5th
she's
grade
getting close.
or
Like
4th grade.
she's really starting to understand like the like earning and then spending, and then she's even like spent some money of her own and then had some buyer's remorse. Like maybe
Yeah.
that was a bad choice. So like we're watching her navigate this right now. I had a friend has a great friend. I really like it. I love the framework. I think he's also got 5 kids. He's
Yeah.
lives in Phoenix, and him and his wife. We were in Croatia with them last year. There was 8 families. There was 18 children between all 8
Holy,
families,
that's not
all
a
vacationing
vacation. That's
together.
a trip.
Yeah, it was a thing.
Yeah, that's a thing.
But he was telling us like, and so his kids, his oldest, I think is 17 or 18.
Yeah.
sort of like between 10 and that age. And they came up with this rule that their kids get everything that they need and half of what they want, that the kids have to pay for the other half. And I'm like, and it's such a simple framework. I'm like, man, I love that. Right. Because I think one of the things that we
It creates
struggle with,
drive, Matt, is what it
dude,
does.
totally.
Yeah.
Like,
And
because
you
we struggle
can't,
with this.
yes. And you can't teach. That's when I love that you said that, because you cannot teach drive to your children.
No.
Like, there's no school that will teach it. I don't care if they're the valedictorian. You can be the smartest person and have zero drive.
Yep.
And like, I just have to tell you real quick. So that when I was in college, that's how my parents raised me, was I was lucky enough that they paid for school, and then they gave me an allowance, which this is what we're doing with our children. And it just covered the bare necessities, right? Like enough to eat, and that's it. But if I wanted to travel with friends, or if I wanted to go shopping, or I wanted to do anything else, I was responsible for that. And it took me about a year of being broke that I finally was like, I'm getting a job. Like, this is ridiculous. And I started my first company in college, not the one I have today, but my first company, just because it created that like, well, fine, I'll just go out and do it myself attitude.
Sure.
And I think, yeah, if you can like purposely piss off your kids in that manner where they're like, well, then I'm going to go do it.
Yep. Yeah, we do
mean,
that. Like we do that
yeah,
even at 9. Like one of the things that my wife and I came up with is she doesn't get an allowance, and she has like, there's non-negotiable chores, things that she has to do in our
right.
home. Like, you're a member of this home, you have to do these things.
And they don't get paid for.
Right. And then there's things above and beyond that we'll pay you for. Like, I will pay somebody to pick up dog poop in the backyard. You can be that person, or I'll pay somebody else. But either way, I'm paying somebody. Right. So that's how we handle the, like, how does she earn the money part? And then we've adopted this, like, everything that you need and half of what you want. And I think the other thing that really, I think Mike was kind of hitting on this, is that the transfer of wealth, while we're not thinking a lot about it, we do think a little bit about it. And I love I don't know if it was a Warren Buffett thing, but this, like, you want to provide your kids with whatever's required so that they can do anything that they want, but not so much that they can do nothing.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, like,
because in the nothingness, right, there's no happiness in nothingness.
Right. Yeah. And I think what happens too, like, part of my family is quite wealthy, and then part of it's not, like in my extended family. And I've watched this over generations now, like, and heard stories about like how they transfer and how they handle this. But it really does become if you're not super intentional about this, what ends up happening is your kids don't learn drive. There is no ambition. There is no, like, resiliency, like these things that you sort of, like, you just sort of get if you're, depending on your life circumstances. Like, there's a lot of people who just get that naturally because they aren't living these super comfortable, cushy lives. But in North America, I find my theory is that, like, we don't realize how good almost so many of us have it. Like, you don't need to be extremely wealthy to be thinking about these things. Like, if you're a high earning middle class family, or you're just like a really high earning individual and you're thinking about having kids, dude, this is a problem. Like, you're likely living a life that was better than the one that you grew up in. A lot of us are.
And it's kind of our inclination, right, to give our kids what we didn't have.
Yes.
And I don't think that benefits them as much as we think it might.
No, 100%. I don't think it does at all. And so, like, what ends up happening too is I don't know about you, but, like, what we struggle with is there's a certain, like, we like to live a certain way, right? And that costs. And the issue becomes, like, well, does your kid also get to live that sort of, because I'm not going to leave my child behind as I go to Europe.
Well, you know what we do? We every other year we fly to Hawaii for a big family tradition, and because I work hard, right? I do put my husband and me in first class, and I put all my kids in the back.
Yeah, well, they're old enough to do that. I can't legally do that. I
know you can't legally do it, but it is.
I'd love to do that.
I know, but it's kind of that same thing. Like, could I put them all in? Yeah, I could. But right, like, then what?
Yep.
Then what? What do they want for? if
This is it.
they have everything they need early on. And
Yeah.
that's where I don't want to screw up. And right is
Yeah.
creating the want to create the drive.
It's almost been a forcing function for us. Like, I actually think that having kids has been good for forcing Jen and I to not be super spendy in a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, after we sold our first company, could have gotten really spendy, but one of the best things I did, and this is like totally aside, we actually, after we sold the first company, we downsized our house. It's the first thing we did.
Yeah.
It was like we went from a really big ass house, fancy life, and we downsized and we moved into like a more normal, regular neighborhood.
Probably, and you probably brought
And
a
it
lot
was
of
so
happiness
good.
with that.
Oh yeah,
Simplifying
man. Like
things.
3 years. And then then we went out and built a house and did the whole thing. But we spent 3 years. We just downsized everything. We purged all of our shit. We're like, what is it? Let's just go and reset. And this was like, our daughter was 3 when we did this. So, from 3 to 6, she kind of like, in those years, we were living mega minimal and had the opposite happen. Like, we didn't have to, we just made a shitload of money. More than we ever need. And by doing that, I actually find like it sort of re-baselined everything, and now because we lived that way, I think our daughter is actually much more aware that how now some of the choices that we make now, she's super aware, like, this is not normal.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. Does she make comments? My youngest, I'm always proud when she says, oh, well, that's really expensive. We don't need to get that, Mom. And it might be just like, if we are out shopping and she sees a shirt she likes and it's, not Target prices, right?
Yeah.
And she'll be like, oh, that's really expensive. And when she says that, one, I immediately just want to get it for her because I'm so proud that she recognized, right? That she can recognize, value and costs, and that some things are more expensive than others. But also I think that she doesn't believe that we just have this unlimited amount of wealth.
Yes.
And right. And that's what I want them to believe. They know that Mom's successful and that Mom's done, built this company. And I just went to the University of Texas and did a podcast with them. It was so fun for my middle daughter because she wants to go to UT, which is where I went. And she sat in the room when we were doing the podcast. And it was a lot of questions about just, normal stuff like a company and raising kids and being a mom. And she's 16, so she hates me on any given day, like literally.
Yeah.
But after we were done, the woman that was interviewing me, we looked over at her and I'm like, oh God, please don't have her eyes like rolling back in her head or whatever. And the woman asked her, she was like, well, what did you think? And my 16-year-old was just like glowing, right? Like smiling big. And like, I could see that she was proud of me.
Yeah.
In that moment. And she heard, I talked a lot about having nothing and the company almost going bankrupt and like going through the issues and being a single mom, like all the really hard parts of it. And then at the end to see her be really proud, like I think the more moments we can give our kids the reality, of it, that we don't just have this big house and we just don't have this thing. Like this is how Mom and Dad struggled to get here.
Yeah, here's the cost.
Yeah. And because they're going to be set up, failure happens. Like it's a part of life, right? And I don't want my children to be scared of it. Like I don't want them to hold back on trying something new because they think they're going to fail at it for financial reasons or just for life reasons and living.
But you're also teaching them that like everything, whether it's financial or not, everything has a cost. It's either got a time cost, a sacrifice cost, a pain cost, a financial cost, like, and trying to, with kids, at least for us, we're just trying to always show her like, yes, you can do that, but this is what it will cost you. Like, yeah, you can go and do horseback riding on Sundays, but that's when you ski. So, are you willing to trade up?
Okay, now you sound like she really lives a great life between horseback riding and skiing. Okay, I've got one last thing and then we can wrap it up. Do you ever let her come to work with you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, so my office and her school are 800 feet apart. Like,
oh, that's awesome.
I can walk down the street. So she goes to a school in the city, really close to where I work. And oh yeah, she'll like, and her school gets out at like 3:00 because, God forbid schools get out of times that line up with work days. So
we actually mimic our work hours with school hours for
that's
that
so
exact
smart.
reason. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so smart. There's a lot of times where like she'll finish school and she'll come to the office and hang out. And she'll like do her like she doesn't have homework. So like she'll like sit there and do
Yeah.
shit in my office.
Do you ever let your staff bring their kids every once in a while?
Oh yeah, there's people that bring their kids in,
Yeah.
especially on like days where like, yeah, man, I don't know if it's
Like
like
if there's a
this in
school
Texas.
holiday, but you're still
Oh
working,
my God. We have
or
so many school
yeah,
holidays here. It's
or they have
stupid.
just a little fever, but it's not really a
Yep.
fever.
Yeah, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Honestly, like my sort of view is I just want my team to always have good judgment and
Yeah.
like just that's like the number one thing. And yeah, if your kid is home because the school's got a holiday and you don't have caretakers, like there's no reason they can't be in the office.
No,
You know,
it's not even that they're like not going to be a bother. I think there's a lot of value
oh,
in our
100% agree.
kids seeing us go to work, seeing what we do,
Totally
right?
agree.
What are we doing when we're not present with them, especially at a very young age? Because
Yep.
they're more physical and like seeing what is dad doing, like, oh, this is his office, and they can kind
We
of
actually,
visualize.
we even arrange like with my kids, with my daughter's school. I have had her class and then the class above and below her. We actually bring them by the Pila Case factory and we
That's so
show them
cool.
how
Yeah.
things are made. We actually get them to make their own phone cases. They put their own little stamp on it. You know, they go through the whole process. They pick an order, they pack it. So
I
they,
love
they
it.
kind of see like this is how a company works.
Oh, yeah. And I think if, for anyone listening to that has the opportunity to get involved in their kids' schools, and this happens more in middle and high school, I think in elementary, I loved career day. Like, don't sign me
Yeah.
up for the Christmas party. I'm definitely not going to bake cookies or do any kind of weird craft stuff. But career day, I am going to win at career day in elementary school. And one thing that we're doing right now in high school, which I just think this is an incredible program, is that it's a class for entrepreneurs. And
Yeah.
these kids have to come up with these pitches, and then
Yeah.
they get local people in our community to basically like sponsor them. And so
Yeah.
I've got this group of 4 girls, and I'm helping them start from beginning, like the ideation, the execution. We're building out like a P&L. We're going through like a cost
Super
of goods
cool.
sold. So freaking cool. Definitely nothing that any class is going to teach them. And even the teacher that teaches this class is one of my daughter's friend's mother. And so I know her, and I'm like, let me come and teach this class. Like, to
Yeah.
me, there's so much value in real world experience for our kids that they don't get in, our schools. Not because they don't want to teach it. It's just how do you, right? Like it's like the more they're exposed to,
Yeah, we
I
depend
think
too much on we're expecting too much of schools.
we
Like,
are.
you know,
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
there's a lot
So
that like parents, I think societally we've outsourced to school.
Yeah.
Where like these are things that they should learn from the family, from their local community, right?
Yeah.
There's a high school locally that has a program like that. And I think it's
it's so cool.
I think
I
it's brilliant.
keep doing it. Keep doing what you're doing. You're changing kids' lives and impacting them, which is
Mhm.
awesome. So
Totally. This is fun, Kate. We got to do this again. This
I'd
is a
love
good
to.
topic. I like
Yeah.
it. All right, that's the pod.
You made it. An amazing episode of the Operators Podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing to the newsletter. Thank you to fulfill the best sponsor on earth, Northbeam, Postscript. They're tied for 2 of the best sponsors on earth. Love them. Love what they do for us. Thank you for being here. Subscribe, like, share. Follow me on Twitter. Follow the other guys on Twitter. Talk to you later. Goodbye.